welcome back to the circus. I am your host, the fantasy football joker, Jack Lusney. You know the drill. Make sure you like, sub, follow, help grow the show. And while you're at it, why don't you help grow the Fantasy Football Advice Forum? It's only $2.99 US per month. It's also $28 a year, so that's basically like 2 trips to Starbucks. You get articles, podcasts, videos, Q&A, chats. You can join leagues. You can post leagues. You can ask for advice. There's all kinds of great content constantly going up. All kinds of great members constantly joining. So make sure that you get in on the ground floor. And check out at FF Advice Forum on Twitter. And make sure that you follow me at Jack Lusney on Twitter. And the Fantasy Football Joker, of course. And at Jack Lusney on YouTube. So it's slow and sleepy times in June, and I've been doing a lot of best ball drafts lately just to kind of keep myself busy. Um, and I think there was one little piece of advice that seems really obvious, but I think it's easy to forget, and it's the value of drafting players from good teams instead of bad teams. And it's like it seems like that's just such an easy thing to say, but I view it as it's better to have 20% of a watermelon than 80% of a grape. You know, let that sink in for a second. And what I'm trying to say is like, okay, yeah, maybe a player has you look at Drake London last year had a 29% target share, and people throw around, oh, 29% target share, 29% target share. Yeah, if the target share was only, 100 targets and he got 29 of them, that's 29% target share. And I'm not saying he only had 29 targets. I actually really like Drake London this year. Even though I'm definitely not sure on Desmond Ritter, I like taking that shot on sophomore wide receivers that are looking to make the leap. So I really like Treylon Burks. I really like Drake London. I really like Chris Olave. A lot of the rookies from last year that, you know, uh, even if they had struggles, if they shined last year, I'm really into them this year. So uh, just going back to, the teams that I really think are going to be just the pits. And I'm trying to avoid them. So that Arizona Cardinals is the most obvious one. You look at Kyler Murray, probably not going to be ready for the beginning of the year. They shipped out DeAndre Hopkins. And so you look at the potential for that team to just tank. Uh, and if that happens, you could see them basically just not even have Kyler Murray return at all for the 2023 season. And they could end up trading him, which would just give them more firepower to either move up to the first round pick if they don't already have it. And they'll probably be looking to take Caleb Williams at that point. So the Arizona Cardinals, when I'm real deep in those best ball drafts, sometimes I'll take a flyer on Michael Wilson or a Greg Dortch. But honestly, I'm avoiding James Conner, and I'm definitely avoiding Marquise Brown. I don't want really anything to do with the Arizona Cardinals this year. Another team that really has me scared on the AFC side is the formerly, I was about to say Oakland, but the Las Vegas Raiders. Um, I look at Jimmy Garoppolo and the fact that they are essentially hinging their hopes on Jimmy G, his ability to stay healthy, and his ability to play well for that offense. And yes, there is a connection there because of Josh McDaniels and Jimmy G's time in New England, but that doesn't mean that it's going to bear fruit in Las Vegas so many years later. And when you look at they lose Darren Waller, and so they end up drafting Michael Mayer, he's a good tight end. He kind of reminds me, I've said before, of Jason Witten, um, but rookie tight ends historically don't hit. So Devonte Adams is going to be a target vacuum, and he can be successful probably catching the ball even if I was the quarterback for that team. So I'm not saying that I'm worried particularly about Devonte Adams necessarily, but I am very nervous about Josh Jacobs coming off last year where the team was fighting a lot more, and so he played through a lot of injuries and he had a lot of volume and a lot of carries, and that's kind of what led to him having the monster season that he had. And I just don't know if necessarily I see those same cards uh, in the future for this year. I'm predicting that Oakland is going to finish last in that division. I could see them honestly giving up on this coaching staff, which makes me really nervous because that's the kind of thing that can really tank some fantasy seasons where, he might still be good in real life, but you're going to be very disappointed as a fantasy manager if push comes to shove and the Raiders just end up sucking. And I think that they are one of the teams that I really see in the AFC that scare me the most in terms of their potential for disaster. Two more teams that I'm not that into. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are just going to be straight up bad this year. And I'm avoiding Chris Godwin, Mike Evans at all costs. I know it's just June, but the quarterbacks, Kyle Trask and Baker Mayfield, are competing to see who can miss the wide receiver by a larger margin. And I don't imagine it's going to be any better when they get to live game action and they're having to face blitz packages. And I'm just pulling up here and seeing Mike Evans is and Chris Godwin. Godwin's being ranked as the wide receiver 28. Evans is the wide receiver 35 on Underdog and Best Ball. And I'm just looking at, I would rather have Brandon Ayuk going after Chris Godwin, even though I don't even know who's going to be the quarterback for that team. I'd rather, I'll give you two teammates actually that I see a lot of upside. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I have not been a fan of what they have done in terms of their passing attack basically since they've moved on from Ben Roethlisberger. But I look at what Kenny Pickett did last year, and it can't be any worse. If he has positive touchdown regression to the mean and just has 20 to 25 touchdowns this year, which I think is very doable given that they've upgraded that offense. I really like both Deontay Johnson and George Pickens this year. I think Deontay Johnson is being undervalued, especially because he was still very much a target leader in the NFL. He had over 100 targets. The thing was, he had 0 touchdowns. And people remember George Pickens because he made those spectacular catches, and he was more of a red zone target. And while I do think that he can also excel in his sophomore season, and there's room for that entire offense to grow together, I like Deontay Johnson a little bit more because I think that he can actually represent volume, especially as a wide receiver 3 that you're drafting a little bit later. And then even looking at guys like Treylon, I would much rather have Treylon Burks, honestly. I would rather have Gabe Davis. I would rather take the shot on Quentin Johnston. So those are just some of the wide receiver names that are going after Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. And I just think unfortunately, I think this could be the year that Mike Evans, his streak breaks where he's not able to get 1,000 yards. And I just don't see any way, shape, or form that offense is going to support 2,000-yard wide receivers. And the other team that I'm just really struggling with is the New York Jets. The arrival of Aaron Rodgers has really thrown things into whack for the New York Jets, and I've always had a soft spot for the Jets. I'm a big fan of the Around the NFL podcast. I love the hosts of the show, Dan Hansis, Greg Rosenthal, and Mark Sessler. And Dan Hansis is a New York Jets fan, and so I've always kind of had like a soft spot for the Jets. I always kind of liked them as a tough underdog team. I really liked back in the Sanchez days when they had Rex Ryan as coach. So that's just a team that I've always kind of rooted for, and so it's weird that suddenly they have like the former MVP, Super Bowl winning quarterback that's supposed to just walk in and be an instant upgrade for this team. And we've seen it happen in the past. But also, if we remember, Brett Favre's stint in New York was so. I think he was much better in Minnesota, which would be really funny if, Aaron Rodgers bombed out of New York and then ended up in Minnesota replacing Kirk Cousins and then had like a really good season there. That would be really weird. But anyways, just looking at for fantasy, when I look at a player like Garrett Wilson, I like Garrett Wilson. I think he's an amazing player, just like everybody else. But to just expect that suddenly Aaron Rodgers is going to catapult him to being, 1,210 is basically like where he's being drafted. That's almost kind of what you're expecting. And when I look at in the range of Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jalen Waddle. So for me personally, I would actually rather have Devontae Adams. So let's specify, in 1 year leagues, obviously, so redraft, best ball, I would rather have Devontae Adams. And I would rather have Amon-Ra St. Brown. Now in Dynasty, I would rather have. I think I still would rather have Sun God, Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm huge on St. Brown. I know Goff isn't the elite quarterback option compared to some of these other wide receivers and the guys throwing them the ball, but when you look at Jalen Waddle, it's not like Tua. I don't see Tua as being that much better than Goff, honestly. So, and Aaron Rodgers is very much a temporary player, and then you don't know what's going to happen for Garrett Wilson after that. Whereas with Detroit, I think Detroit is going to be just good enough to not be able to draft a replacement quarterback unless they trade up. So I guess that you could see that. But if they did that and they got a rookie quarterback, if they traded up as far as, getting a Caleb Williams type, like that, you could almost consider that in the future that would be an upgrade for Amon-Ra St. Brown. So I'm just very bullish on Amon-Ra. He's been very good to me as a fantasy owner. So I think I would still rather have Amon-Ra, but I do understand the hype on Garrett Wilson, but it is hard for me, especially in a single year, to take him over Devontae Adams or Amon-Ra. And then when I'm deciding between Garrett Wilson and Jalen Waddle, that's, it's a tough decision most times. And I think Tua's health can kind of play a factor, but just this expectation that Aaron Rodgers is going to come in and just kind of be this savior and push Garrett Wilson to being the superstar wide receiver that Devontae Adams once was, possible, I don't know that it's necessarily probable the way that he's being drafted with that capital. Honestly, even if you look at running backs, like going right after Jonathan Taylor, Nick Chubb, and Saquon Barkley, I would rather have, even in Dynasty, Jonathan Taylor for sure. But I think I would rather have Nick Chubb. In a 1 year league, for sure, I would rather have Nick Chubb. But that's just, now you're comparing apples to oranges. But even apples to apples, like I was saying, he's going in a range where you are basically taking him over stud receivers. And so, yeah, that's tough. It's tough for me. I get it because I see the talent that Garrett Wilson has and the complete litany of quarterbacks that he suffered through last season, but um, yeah, it scares me a little bit to just assume that Aaron Rodgers is still Aaron Rodgers. And he's still that bad man, just like Stephen A. Smith would say. And so, our main topic tonight that I wanted to talk about, and it's because it's basically my favorite way to play fantasy football, uh, especially. So, when I first came into fantasy football, the first year that I played was the Jimmy Graham monster year, where he did so good that he wanted to be paid as a wide receiver. And that year, the person who had Jimmy Graham dominated in such a fashion that it was nearly impossible to beat them. They ended up winning the championship that year, and it was all because you could not overcome the advantage that was Jimmy Graham at the tight end position. And so uh, if you had Jimmy Graham and Drew Brees that year, forget about it. And so that was the first time I really saw just how valuable a proper Q quarterback and tight end stack can be. And they're extra valuable to me because of the scarcity of the position. And so if you look at every team mostly has two wide receiver at least. And now with the breakout of running back by committee, it makes the multiple running backs valuable on the same team. So you look at teams like the Commanders that have Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson. You could argue, both have value in fantasy. There's multiple committee backfields that you can look at. So, until Brees Hall comes back, the Jets that I was speaking about earlier will be relying mostly on Michael Carter and rookie pick with the best name ever, Israel Abanaconda. Abanaconda don't want no unless you got bone, but anyways, getting back to, I think the because of the scarcity of the position and the fact that to me it's harder I find to stream maybe not quarterbacks but tight ends. God, good lord, streaming tight ends is just such a bog, and I hate it so much. And so that's the one that I especially will avoid at all costs. I will draft multiple decent tight ends just so I can avoid trying to have to stream them. Um, but the other thing is that I find that quarterbacks and tight ends, the good ones anyways, for the most part, don't get injured the same way that running backs especially do. But even wide receivers, and when you look at wide receivers, a lot of times there's rookie breakouts almost every year that people didn't expect. So, you look at last year in redraft leagues, a player like Romeo Dobbs kind of came out of nowhere and had spot start value. There's always players kind of like that. Even, he wasn't a rookie, but Zay Jones was the ultimate spot starter last year. So you look at players like that that you get late. And I just find it's so much easier to hit on those late wide receivers and to focus on getting and then keeping my fab for the running backs that come up because it happens every year. Players get injured, especially running backs, and running backs that nobody really expected pop up and end up being valuable for a game or two. So you look at a guy like Deion Jackson. You look at late in the season, Jerick McKinnon kind of took over and helped people win fantasy championships. So those are the type of players that I want to be able to spend my time, energy, fab, waiver priority, whatever it is. I want to spend that time on running backs and wide receivers and not, having to find my quarterback too to cover a bye week or because I don't like the matchup because I took, you know, like a Kirk Cousins or something, and he's got like a tough prime time matchup. I might not feel great about that. So there's certain situations where I really like to play with the elite quarterback tight end stack. And so the last couple years in multiple leagues, I would go for the early, if I was especially at the back of the first round, uh, if I'm at the turn, so if I'm in a 12-person league and I was at that 112, I was taking Kelsey Mahomes all day. And I would just hit my running backs and wide receivers later. Um, so this year is the first year where uh, I don't know that I'll be getting much Mahomes Kelsey. I have still the Mahomes Kelsey stack in one of my dynasty leagues, a 16-man dynasty league. So that one's pretty deadly. But in terms of redraft, and even some of the dynasty startups that I've been doing, and in these best ball leagues that I've been doing, Travis Kelsey has jumped so high that it's like everyone's hip to it now. Everyone's trying to get the jump on Travis Kelsey, and I've noticed that wisely, oftentimes, once Travis Kelsey goes off the board, Mahomes, because people are still willing to wait on quarterback, usually does not. So if you took Kelsey at the 1.6, which is actually happening, it's happened a lot in my best ball leagues, but even in the 10-man dynasty startup that I did recently, I think Kelsey went either 1.7 or 1.8. And so when it came back around, Mahomes was just sitting right there. And so it's easy to pair them together and then just trust yourself to be able to draft those valuable running backs later. So last year I took Mahomes, Kelsey, 1-2. I took, I guess, Kelsey, Mahomes, 1-2. And then I took Jamal Williams later, much later in the draft because I really liked his value and what he represented to the Detroit Lions last year. And then that turned into he was my running back too, basically for the entire year. So when you're able to hit on those running backs later in the draft, which I feel is easier, honestly, than trying to pick up a guy like Dalton Schultz and hope that he can be successful not just on a new team but with a rookie quarterback. So you look at situations like that. So I wanted to focus basically on my favorite quarterback tight end stacks. A very long intro to get to. These are my top 8 quarterback tight end stacks for the 2023 season. And so I did organize this with Dynasty in mind. So it is a little bit based on age. And with that being said, the number one quarterback tight end stack is Lamar Jackson and Mark Andrews. And so I love this stack. I believe that they're both high value elite players. And what I really love about this stack is that because of last year, because of the injuries, which honestly, I always say, unless a player is like, dealing with like several concussions, so you look at a player like Tua, that's an injury concern that you could say. But otherwise, basically, if you play football, you're at risk of injury. That's what football is. It's high speed collisions on every play. So because of that, though, Lamar and Mark Andrews are essentially being discounted this year. And so I've seen them going basically in the middle of the third and fourth rounds, kind of close together. So there is a little bit of finesse that you have to have here. But if you are at the 3.5 or the 3.6, you're kind of in those middle of the rounds. I have seen a few times where Mark Andrews and then Lamar Jackson can fall to you in that third, fourth round. And so if you're able to take two elite skill players in your first and second round and then follow that up immediately in the third, fourth round with a beautiful quarterback tight end stack like Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson, that's all day, every day. Now, in super flex leagues, obviously, you're going to have to do it a little bit different. But now, if you're talking about a super flex dynasty, I don't mind making that leap of, Mahomes is going to be going in the first part of the draft. If you still want to be able to get the elite quarterback tight end stack and you're, later in the draft, say at the 1.8, you can go ahead and grab Lamar Jackson first, and then when it comes back around in that second round, Mark Andrews should still be there for you, and you can grab that stack. So I think that's my number one for Dynasty, for redraft, for best ball. I think this is going to be a big year for the Ravens. They're really going to put an emphasis on the passing game, which I think means that Mark Andrews is going to repeat the career year that we saw prior when he was the tight end one, and he took that title from Kelce. He's the only one who's done it for a hot minute. And so, speaking of the title, until proven otherwise, number two, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce are still the kings of the quarterback tight end stack. And the only reason I have them number two is Kelce's age, because Father Time is undefeated, but also the draft capital. So, like I had mentioned before, Travis Kelce has pushed all the way as high as, last year, even when people were still kind of hip to it, he was still going, 111, 112. Now it's to the point where Travis Kelce is being pushed as high as 1.6, 1.7 in a lot of these 12-man leagues that I've been doing on best ball at least. But I think that translates to also single quarterback leagues where he's being pushed up really high. And so I think that's the only real reason, that, and like I said, the age factor, that you could begin to fret maybe a little bit. But technically speaking, they should be number one, but for the reasons I laid out, for me, they are number two. And number three is Jalen Hurts and Dallas Goedert. So I like the value here. You can get Jalen Hurts basically in the third round. You do have to be a little bit more at the front of the third round, because basically once Mahomes and Allen go off the board, Hurts, generally speaking, tends to be the next quarterback to go. There are a couple people who take Burrow, sometimes Herbert, but for the most part it's Hurts because of the rushing advantage that he is able to provide. And, Goddard, you don't have to spend up quite as much for him. He is going a little bit earlier, than I would have hoped. He's going in about the 6-7 ish round. But, and Goddard, when you look at his actual numbers, he is still unproven. And both of them, Lamar gets hate for missing games. Hurts has missed games also, though, and so has Goddard. So both of them have injury concerns, you could argue. So it does knock them a little bit down compared to the first two elite stacks that I see in Lamar and Mark Andrews and Mahomes and Kelsey. But then, I have had occasion where I'll take that Hurts Goddard stack. Though I haven't done it quite as often because I do feel like I'm reaching a little bit on both players. Um, and it does hinge widely on the success of the Philadelphia Eagles, but I do expect them to win that division again. And so at number 4 is actually my favorite quarterback tight end stack to draft this year, and that's Trevor Lawrence and Evan Ingram. And that's because they have the best value, but they also, to me, have the potential to provide elite fantasy value because this division is just ripe for the picking. The Indianapolis Colts and the Houston Texans have both reset essentially with rookie quarterbacks. The Tennessee Titans are rolling out the same old show, and I think that their defense, is suspect to me. Because they didn't, I just don't see really where they added value on either side of the ball ultimately. The Titans, they usually end up being good anyways in spite of themselves because they have good coaching, but I think Trevor Lawrence and Evan Ingram can do some things this year. You look at Evan Ingram especially, let me just pull him up right here. I know Evan Ingram, again, we talk about the injury concern and the injury risk. Like I've mentioned, every player has that. Ingram, basically, coming off kind of a resurgent year, had 73 receptions, 766 yards, and 4 touchdowns. So I like the value that Ingram represents, and I like pairing him with especially like if I took an elite tight end early, like if I took Mark Andrews early, sometimes I will still double up and take Evan Ingram later. Uh, I have done that before, and people think it's crazy, but um, I like having two quarterback tight end stacks that I can rely on basically for the entire year, and I'll just play my whole year mining running backs and wide receivers and trading for running backs and wide receivers. And like I had mentioned, I'll spend all my time focusing on advancing my skill players because the core of my team is basically set. um, and so with Trevor Lawrence and Evan Ingram, the value on Ingram especially is nice, but with Trevor Lawrence, he's like the last elite quarterback that I really want on my team because basically, once Burrow and Justin Herbert go, it's kind of Trevor Lawrence, and then you start falling into Dak Prescott and the next quarterback on my list, which at number 5 is Daniel Jones and Darren Waller. So this might actually be the most undervalued and underrated stack, especially if you're in a 4-point passing touchdown league, because Danny Dimes, his run value is underrated. I feel like he does have the ability to run. He does do it. He gets rushing touchdowns, which are more valuable in those leagues than passing touchdowns. And you look at uh, just the skill players that they have on the team. They just seem to be collecting slot receivers. So I think Darren Waller definitely could lead that team in targets. And if that happens, he's going to be a nice volume play for that team and for your fantasy team. And they are going very late. They are the second quarterback tight end stack that I'm actually taking in a lot of these drafts. So a lot of times, if I'm taking Mark Andrews early, if I took Kelsey Mahomes in the first, second round, by the time I get down to that like 8th to 10th to 12th round, because Daniel Jones generally goes really late. Darren Waller, you have to spend up a little bit, but he's being undervalued. I feel like we'll see what happens, after the summer and come preseason hype, and how much his value gets pushed up. But for right now, he is definitely representing a nice value. At number 6, we have Captain Kirk Cousins and TJ Hawkinson. Now, I don't really love the value of Hawkinson because he's going in those meaty mid rounds of like 4 or 5 ish. But if you take that plunge, like it's easy to pair him with Kirk as a second quarterback because Kirk's going real late, like he usually does. But also with them having just traded Dalvin Cook, I don't expect Alexander Madison to just get like 400 carries. So I actually think that they're just going to throw the ball a lot, like a lot, which is a bit of a departure from their previous, game theories and the way that the style of play that they enjoy. But when you look at the talent that they have on the team, when you talk about Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, KJ Osborne, TJ Hawkinson, I think they're going to throw it around the sandlot. And so I actually really like the value of Kirk Cousins late in drafts as a second quarterback. But Hawkinson is a little bit rich, but I get it because especially when you have Justin Jefferson, it's not like it's going to open up the middle of the field basically. And Hawkinson was dominant in certain stretches, and so I could see him definitely finishing as a top 3 tight end if everything goes well for that team. Moving on to number 7. I might just be a little too high on this one, but I've just fallen in love with Sam Laporta. I love his tape. I love his athleticism. I love the landing spot. I actually think Sam Laporta can have the best rookie tight end season out of all the tight ends drafted, but mainly like the big 3. You look at Dalton Kincaid, you look at Michael Mayer. I prefer Sam Laporta. The opportunity is there. He's only competing with Brock Wright, who's the incumbent tight end. He's essentially replacing TJ Hawkinson, so there's a team need. Jared Goff is known to use tight ends and to use them effectively. So I love Laporta. Laporta is just, he's in almost every draft that I've taken Mark Andrews, I've also taken Sam Laporta late because generally it does take the rookies a little bit longer to acclimate, but it's more of like a breaking case of glass emergency kind of thing. But I love his value, and I think that he could definitely be a diamond in the rough for your fantasy team. And coming in at number 8, my lucky number, I put Voldemort and David Njoku. So Voldemort, I actually mean Deshaun Watson, he who shall not be named or massaged. Look, moral aspects aside, it's a nice late value stack. Deshaun Watson's going about the 6th to 7th to 8th rounds. Because honestly, he looked rusty last season, and it makes sense after all the time he missed. But after going through an entire off-season camp and preseason, by the time the regular season rolls around, I think he'll be back more to his normal self. And so, you look at David Njoku potentially continuing to make the leap. He's a very athletic tight end. People like him a lot. I get it. It's one of those, it's a late value stack that could potentially pan out. And finally, we'll just quickly talk about a couple bonus stacks. Really at the end of drafts, I mentioned Dalton Schultz, I'm not a huge believer, but there is potential. CJ Stroud, they traded up for him. If he ends up being the quarterback that they expect him to be, then, Stroud and Schultz could end up being a potentially valuable stack that you can get really late. If you were one of the people that happened to draft Justin Herbert, which is something I've done in very like at least half my drafts in best ball. I think Justin Herbert presents tremendous value this year because I don't see how he doesn't go for basically 40 500 yards and 40 touchdowns. So I love Justin Herbert, and you can get Gerald Everett basically for free at the end of your drafts just to kind of get that pair. Um, Kyle Pitts, I'm not really a believer, but if you take him, you can get Desmond Ridder basically for free. George Kittle, good luck guessing who's going to be the quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers, but whoever it ends up being, technically you could put them together. And I was really big on Dalton Kincaid, but the more that I've looked into it, the more I think I'm cooling on Kincaid. Allen is basically the second quarterback off the board, sometimes the first quarterback off the board, depending on league format. So you're not getting any value there, but you can get Kincaid. Yeah, Kincaid's even getting pushed up, honestly. So you're not getting a ton of value on either player, and so I don't super like that stack. That is it. That is all. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Fantasy Football Joker. Once again, please make sure to go check fantasyfootballadviceforum.com. It is only $2.99 a month, only $28 a year. That is US American dollars. And you can join the community that we are building there. It is a lot of fun. There's questions going up every day. There's posts going up every day, articles. You could even post your leagues and join other leagues. It's you're getting in at the ground level, and it's an awesome community to be a part of. So please make sure you go check that out, and of course smash that like button, follow, sub, do what you got to do, help a brother out, and make sure you follow me at Jack Loosley on Twitter and at FF Advice Forum on Twitter as well. Thank you and have a tremendous evening. Stay crazy.